Wow, I don't know who that guy was. Doesn't ring a bell with me. Thank you so much for being here, and we love the idea of giving you a snapshot of our collection and a sense of why we collect and the meaning of the things that we collect and why we think it enriches our lives, and hope that it'll enrich yours by getting a quick glimpse of this. Let me just go back and to when I was at Williams, and I started off taking the obligatory survey course in art, and trying to memorize all those pictures and stuff. I wasn't sure I was terribly good at that, but I did like the different periods and the styles. And when I was in med school, I took a year off, and one of the things I did during that year, I wanted to collect some art, but I really didn't have the pocketbook to do it. So I started an art gallery with somebody who had a lot more experience than I did. We were on a shoestring. It was on Mass Ave in Cambridge, and it was called Retina Gallery. And that's the way we were able to look at a lot of art, and some of those pieces still are in our home. Then I went down to Washington. I was in the public health service, helping to start the medical program for the Job Corps. And my wife and I, Karin, got excited about quilts. And so we started collecting quilts, particularly New England, but some from as far afield as Michigan or Ohio, and really loved the spatial qualities of those exciting quilts as well as the craftsmanship. So then there was a quiescent period where we really didn't do any collecting, but we got involved in conservation. We joined with some other friends to start a small group that gives grants to conserve works of art, some in the U.S., some outside in Europe and in Mexico. And then in the early 1990s, we went and were visiting my parents in Long Island and had an extra week, and we went to Maine. I'd never spent any time there. How many of you spent time in Maine? Well, you know how seductive it is. And this was the end of August, and there were no mosquitoes, and it was warm, and we got seduced. And we wound up buying this little cottage, sight unseen, inside. We couldn't get inside it. We loved the grounds. So we bought it on the spot. And then the question was, well, how do we furnish this thing? Because it was unfurnished and didn't really look good to have modern furniture in it. So we started looking at antique stores to find out what can we use, what couch might work, what chairs might work, what lighting things might work. And that's how we got started involved in antiques. So there's room down here also, by the way, for those of you who don't fear being in the first row, as I always did when I was at Williams. So we started looking around, and the good thing was we knew nothing. So we had to ask people, and we found out who really would give us the straight information and who was kind of, maybe not. We also started reading a lot of books and going to see a lot of other collections. So we basically were self-taught, but with a lot of help from some dealers and others who really, and collectors who would, when we bought something, would say, is that really what you want? So we made some mistakes. Fortunately, our mistakes, to the degree we know about them, have been relatively few, but everybody who starts collecting makes some mistakes. So we started, we were drawn to the country work, to the naive work. There is a wonderful exhibition at the American Folk Art Museum called Self-Taught Genius, which you all should see in New York. But it's that sense of naive, these are untutored, it doesn't mean that they're any less accomplished in their own way, but don't necessarily do things based on tradition or based on conventions of the time. So we were drawn to this, and Karin and I then started looking at antique shops, and over time, one of the things that's happened is you find fewer and fewer of the things you want in an antique shop, both because the pieces have become rarer, and also because we've become a little more discerning. So we now, what can you see with your eye? What can you feel with your hand looking at things? What kind of special lighting can you use to look at things? When you blacklight, what do you see and what don't you see? Now, the thing that we don't suffer from, however, is two things: enthusiasm and consistency. No, we're very enthusiastic, but we don't suffer from consistency in the sense that we've bought all the things that we like. Most people we know specialize. Some people specialize in lighting devices. Some people specialize in Windsor chairs. Some specialize in Newport furniture, high furniture, formal furniture from a particular maker or a particular period. Whatever catches our eye and that we like and we think is genuine and has integrity and adds to the breadth of the collection are things that we go after. Increasingly, it's been necessary to get those at auction or through a few dealers that are able to find things privately. And it's kind of sad for us that we can't really just go into a lot of antique shops and find things that would really be of the quality that we're looking for, but it's kind of what's happened. So that's the background. Now let's, just I mentioned country, let's start with a country place that you might know. Let's see, Isaac, this is a question for you. Do you know where Berkshire County is? Where is it? It's here, exactly. You see, everybody knows, including really smart kids, that this is Berkshire County. So let's look at Berkshire County as one of the places that some of our pieces probably come from. We don't always know. This area was initially inhabited by the Mahikani. I don't say it exactly right, but that's the Indian group. That's the Native American tribe. And they were here until the early 18th century, when you have some farms and homesteads put up here, mainly of English and Scottish stock. And this is no surprise for those of you who have been listening to the problems of alcohol at Williams College, that the English paid the Indians 460 pounds, 3 barrels of cider, and 30 quarts of rum for what is now Berkshire County. The industry was agriculture, especially dairy farming and sheep herding and wool production. The soil here, though, is thin and it's rocky. It's not terribly easy to cultivate crops, and it pushed the settlers to develop sawmills and grist mills, grain mills. And of course, the families were largely self-sufficient. They would only buy what they couldn't make, and they were quite inventive, so that wasn't too many things. Over time, as industrialization, you see the Industrial Revolution take hold. You see North Adams become a huge center for mills. In fact, it was the biggest center for mills, I think, in Massachusetts in the second half of the 19th century, so it changed tremendously. But just think about, when you're looking at our pieces, that there were no typewriters, there were no cameras, there were no phones, there were no televisions. There were horses, and there were boats, and there were donkeys, and that's so getting around and also getting materials was a lot different than it is now. And with that, I'm just Karin and I are going to show you a few pieces that you'll see and just give you a few comments on them. All these are some of the ones that are upstairs. So these two pieces are the Native American pieces. The top one is for Penobscot Indians, and it's made by birch bark. It's a traditional form of McCuck, which was used to keep small objects in, and this is made with birch and spruce and sweetgrass, and you can notice the very traditional decoration on it and the round top with the sides being drawn up, folded up. That's very, very typical. It's early 19th century. A little later in the 19th century, we have from the northern, all these are part of the northern woodlands. This is the Algonquin branch, and here this is made by elm bark, and it's a covered container, mid 19th century. This is elm, again stripping the bark, and you can see the zigzag and the sun and the quatrefoil, which are very traditional. It's probably looking looking up from the ground to the sun, and then some. We don't know exactly at least I don't know what the other markings mean, but they're very symbolic and traditional. So this is a busk. How many of you know what a busk is? We have 3 or 4 buskers here. Busks are corset stays, and these were made by sailors predominantly for their women. their sweethearts or their wives. So CH is who this was for, and it's made by E. Warren. And you can see this is a piece of whalebone. You can see how intricate it is. If you look at the top, you'll see the interlocking hearts, which is quite beautiful. You see the stars. You'll see two pinwheels. You'll see some shrub or plant that probably represents fecundity or fertility. But look how creative the design is. And there's even a little mistake towards the bottom, if you see it. You know, they weren't about to start again when they had this one little mistake. Let me see if I can find it here. This is not the right one. Yeah, right there, see? So it's not everything is perfect. We have a large collection of busts, large, 6 or 7, but you'll see some are wood, and we wonder if those were corset stays because they're awfully big. Then there's also whale baleen that have been made into corset stays. Now this is made by a very sophisticated but very young woman, age 9. This is Eunice Hooper of Marblehead. Comes from a very prominent family, and she was at one of the academies that they had for young women that would teach them essential skills. And you can see that this is beautiful. It's silk thread on linen, and you have a lot of things going on there. You have the girl reading inside, and the question is all this what she's imagining, or is all this what she's reading about? You have the chariot. You have that's Athena, I don't know exactly. You have somebody a girl with a scythe cutting the hay. We're debating whether these are firecrackers or pom-poms in her hand. You have beautifully finished and exuberant roses or flowers of some type, a lot of birds, and this figure with a waistcoat picking fruit. And you see a very clear notion of how the Georgian house is built, and it's a fantastic piece. It's about 1790. She was 9, and this was, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has her wedding dress. In addition, they have some letters from her father to the school that she was at, the academy, asking about her progress. So we know actually a lot about Eunice Hooper, maybe more than she wanted us to know. This now is the desk that's never been painted, and it was made for Ebenezer Devotion. This is the Devotion family of Scotland, Connecticut. Yes, Scotland, Connecticut. It's made of maple and brasses, all original. And it has these feet, which are called ball feet, which are typical. This is a transitional style to the William and Mary period. And what's interesting about this is it's a slant top desk, and you see when it comes down it can be secured so you could write on it, which was an important innovation. And then you see the file cabinet, right? Those cubby holes, that was the file cabinet for somebody who had to do a lot of work. And this was kept in this family a long time. A number of them were ministers, and they probably wrote their sermons on this. So it was made sometime between 1700 and 1740, and it was in the family for over 300 years, basically, until it was bought by a dealer, and then went to somebody in Texas where we were able to find it. If you look closely on the left-hand side, you can see the marks. The plane marks, how this was planed down, and when you get closer, you can see it even better. So this is a very special piece, at least for us, and this is a very well-known family. It's a very great portrait of Ebenezer by an artist who I'll talk about in a little bit. And also you see a miniature. There's an example of a miniature. This happens to be by somebody called the Puffy Sleeve Artist, and I won't spend any time on that, but you'll see what I mean when you get to look at it. And the portrait will be Winthrop Chandler. Now, this piece is called a Madison chest, and this is one of 2 pieces you'll see upstairs from Vermont. This one is from South Shaftesbury, Vermont. One of the things that happened after the Revolution was that in the new dawning of America, they wanted to emulate fancy woods, even if you couldn't afford that. That's what you do in the country. And also to emulate marble. So you'll see, we have, for example, have a surround for our fireplace that is faux marble. And it's very beautifully done. But this shows a level of exuberance beyond simply the grain painting to emulate something else. This is its own thing. And this is one of a very limited number of Madison chests, Metteson. And it used to be thought that that was the name of the maker. Now it appears that that was the owner of at least one of these chests. We do not know who the maker. They're very recognizable. They're just wonderful color. You can see this mustard green and red, and just such an individualized design with an incredible level of exuberance. Now, let's say it says 1720, and how long do you think you're going to spend in church on a Sunday? A long time. And do you think it's possible your feet might get cold? Yeah, I think so too. Well, they thought so too. And this is actually a chip carved foot warmer, one of the best you'll ever see. It turns out that there was somebody who was asked to appraise an estate. This happened to be in an estate, and he brought it immediately to a dealer who, our good luck, brought it to us first, because this is absolutely top quality. Look at the chip carving in that very early period. And this is oak. Oak was only used really in a very, very early period, and it has a very interesting locking mechanism inside. As you will see, it has a metal cup in which you put coals, and that's how you kept warm. And at the top you can see it's fenestrated, so you can there, and then you can also see they've spent a lot of time worrying about the holder, how that is twisted iron. So it's just a gorgeous piece. We hope you'll agree. Now, the light in this room would probably, how many candles do you think it would require to just have the level of lighting we have in this room? One or two? Maybe 20 or 30? Yeah. Light was very precious. Tallow was very expensive. It was hard to make, but it was very expensive. And so there was an effort to try and magnify the light from any candle. And what you see here from the late 18th century is a mirrored sconce with all those pieces of glass basically reflecting it. And we have two of these, as you'll see on the right-hand side, in our fireplace. And when we had an electrical outage last Thanksgiving, we turned on the candles, lit the candles, and it was amazing how much light each one of these could throw off. So this was the first effort to magnify it, and it's actually quite beautiful to see when they're lit. But times go on, and innovation is important. And these then are what do you think? How do you think these would light? Whale oil, exactly. This is whale oil. These are whale oil lamps. We're not sure from their Boston glass manufacturer, New England glass. They could be from Sandwich or from Boston around 1815. These are really gorgeous pieces of art. At least I think so. And you can see that there's double wicks here, and that gave a lot more light. Whale oil was a fairly evanescent period. It became expensive. Camphene followed it, but exploded. There was a lot of efforts to try and improve lighting, but this is one of the wonderful examples of art meeting utility. Now, I mentioned Winthrop Chandler. This is Winthrop Chandler, and this is the overmantel from Ebenezer Waters' house. Ebenezer is a common name. You know, whenever I think of Ebenezer, I think of Scrooge, but this is Ebenezer Waters' house in West Sutton, Massachusetts. These were done for over the mantel, and there were two of them there, of which this is one. And it is a scene that really depicts life around this bucolic setting. So you have a river meandering through, and down at the bottom you have two gentlemen saluting each other. Notice the nature of those horses and the nature of their clothing. And here is may have been a slave, or certainly African American, on a real swayback horse. You wonder how that horse can go another step or two. You have a woman with a child there, and she has a handkerchief over her nose because you don't think it necessarily smelled very good along those places where you had so many horses and pigs and others. And where are the lovers? Oh, there they are. Notice that? And then you have the house behind, a lot of beautiful trees to give perspective. You have hunting going on beyond. And you also have a large number of birds. There were more birds in the sky in that period than we have now. And you see it oftentimes in photographs. So this is a great overmantel by Winthrop Chandler. It was done by probably painted during the time that Washington was president, just to give you some idea. And you can see a lot of remnants of English life and how some of that is changing. And now I'm going to leave it to my wonderful spouse to talk about a couple of the portraits before we go upstairs. Thank you.
Hi, well, I want to welcome you all here and thank you for coming for this short little lecture we're giving today. I also want to thank Tina and all the people who work with her and the curator for the wonderful job they've done of putting this show together. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and we're just delighted to see how this has come together. So thank you very much, Kevin Murphy and Tina. I also want to say a special hello to Anne Radice, who's from the director of the American Folk Art Museum, who drove up here from New York today. And she's a pleasure to work with. I'm a trustee of the museum, and very thrilling to see the progress that we've made there. I'm going to talk to you today about a couple of folk art portraits, but before I do that, yesterday I was at a cocktail party, and a gentleman I was talking to was going to show me a picture, and he must have scrolled through 500 pictures. But we're talking about, let's go back in time a little bit to the beginnings of this country, and of course there was no such thing as a cell phone where we could take a picture, or a Facebook page where we could look at pictures of our friends and family, and there certainly wasn't an Instagram. So there wasn't even simple photography. So these portraits were very, very important because people back then had the same longing that we all have to have images of people they love and care about. There was at the beginning of this country, you could go to a place like Boston if you were wealthy or famous and have a portrait done. And but that wasn't always convenient for people who lived in the country. So an enterprising group of artists developed who traveled throughout New England and offering their skills as portrait painters. And these itinerant painters were generally self-taught. In other words, they weren't academic painters. And the work they produced was different from the work of academic painters of the time and the dominant British style that we see in their paintings. Instead, these artists created a body of work that is distinctly American in its direct and earthy presentation of the men, women, and children who made up America's growing middle and upper class. Jonathan and I particularly love these portraits, certainly for their beauty and their unusual artistic qualities, but also for the stories that they tell about the people who helped make America what it is today. There are 14 portraits in this exhibition, and I hope you will be able to spend a couple minutes looking at each one of them. But for now, I want to just talk to you about two. First of all, on this screen, we have a portrait of a very handsome young man who has piercing blue eyes and a level of confidence in his look that seems particularly American. This was painted by an itinerant artist who worked throughout New England named Sheldon Peck, who had an interesting personal history. Not only was he an accomplished itinerant folk artist, but he was also a radical abolitionist, a conductor on the Underground Railroad, an advocate for temperance, public education, racial equality, and women's rights. Good for him, huh? And this portrait itself has a surprising story about how it came out into the marketplace for us to purchase. It is in a remarkable state of preservation for a painting that's about 184 years old. You can see how vibrant the colors are. There's very little loss. It looks like it was painted yesterday. But it wasn't. It was rediscovered in August 1977 on an episode of Antiques Roadshow. In 1997.
97.
Yeah.
You said 77.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1997. In an episode of Antiques Roadshow, when the owner brought a print in this frame for inspection and evaluation. The owner thought maybe that the print was worth something or might be interesting, but he thought maybe the frame might be too. The print was removed from the frame and the painting was revealed, much to the shock of the owner and the delight of folk art enthusiasts all over the country. We were lucky enough to purchase this at auction in 2005. So I'm going to move to the next one. In contrast to the painting of the young man by Sheldon Peck, we have a portrait here of a woman named Betsy Brennell Gilbert by the most well-known and perhaps the best itinerant painter of the time, Ami Phillips. Phillips worked throughout Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York in a career that spanned 5 decades. His marketing plan was simple. He would replace ads in local newspapers announcing the dates he would be in a town, advertising the price, which was about $5 for a portrait, and he even offered a money-back guarantee. That's how much confidence he had in his ability to paint. Phillips painted Betsy between 1820 and 1830. She is a stunning young woman wearing a soft white dress with an intricate lace collar and a charming necklace. She is the picture of femininity. But the artist moved away from the completely romanticized portrait that it could have been by painting her in a brightly colored shawl and an exuberant drapery. We were lucky that when we purchased this portrait, the lot included the comb that we see in her hair, which was very typical of the time, and the dress she is wearing. It is now dyed black. New Englanders were quite thrifty, and there was no Forever Young store nearby, so they used their clothing over and over. And we think perhaps she became a widow, and so she dyed it black and used it again. So that's a look at 2 of the portraits we have. We have more upstairs. And Jonathan and I could go on, but we won't. And so we want you to have time to enjoy all the pieces in the show. So let's move on upstairs to the galleries where Kevin, Tina, Jonathan, and I will be available to answer any questions that you have and tell you more stories about the art.